Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. No introduction required for this one, given it's an emergency episode of sorts. I sat here 24 hours ago and recorded an episode detailing all the recent trade speculation surrounding the Golden State Warriors. At the end of it, I said that I'd be back for a post-game live following Sunday's game against the Mavericks, unless, of course, there was further trade news. Well, that trade news has come in a big way here in recent hours, with the Warriors set to acquire Dennis Schroder from the Brooklyn Nets once De'Anthony Melton becomes officially trade eligible on Sunday. So according to Shams Charania, it will be Dennis Schroder and 1 second-round pick in exchange for De'Anthony Melton and 3 second-round picks. I do want to add a slight tidbit of information from Jake Fisher of the Stein Line, who reports that two-way contracted guard Reece Beekman is also likely to be included in the deal. We'll wait and see if that is the case when the deal officially goes down on Sunday. We'll see what second-round picks those ones are. But on the surface of things, looking at it immediately, it's a great move for the Warriors. A great move for the Warriors and great value for the Warriors, more importantly. And you have to give credit to Mike Dunleavy Jr. I had a mate message him before. He said initial thoughts on the trade, and I responded to him and said, it's objectively a good trade. It's great value for the Warriors. You are giving up 2 second-round picks for a guy that's averaging over 18 points a game, over 6.5 assists per game, is shooting in excess of 38% from three on decent volume, who feels a need for you that was desperately required in terms of a backup point guard, another ball handler, another playmaker, another shot maker. It is objectively a good trade for the Warriors. Now, you can then discuss, well, does getting Dennis Schroder really push them over the top into becoming championship contenders? And I think most people in that situation would say no. And therefore, is it really a significant franchise-altering trade? No, absolutely not. But you don't expect that either when you're essentially giving up 2 second-round picks for a guy. So it is objectively a good trade that will help the Warriors and will make the Warriors better. Now, clearly, I think there's going to be something else in the pipeline here over the next few weeks leading up to the February 6th deadline. But for now, Dennis Schroder, will probably see him in a Warrior uniform come, Thursday, I think, against the Memphis Grizzlies. So looking forward to that. Just a few things from a transactional point of view, and then we'll get into some of the on-court stuff here. I'll make this reasonably short and sharp. But perhaps the most important thing that has emanated from this trade that I spoke about yesterday, that I was actually ill-informed about. I'll put my hand up and say I'm ill-informed about this. So I wasn't aware that the Warriors acquiring Dennis Schroder, they will still be able to trade him and aggregate other salaries with him to make another move before the February 6th deadline. So for those of you that watched or listened to my episode yesterday, I was talking about whether acquiring Schroder would potentially impact their ability to make a bigger move, and not having Melton's salary. Like if, the Warriors wanted to go out and get Jimmy Butler or LeBron James, guys making nearly $50 million, not having that $12.8 million Melton contract might actually inhibit their ability to do that. Well, according to Bobby Marks, who's obviously the front office insider for ESPN, he says that the Warriors and the Nets, for that matter, in regard to Melton, they can still trade those guys at the February 6th deadline. That is super important here for the Warriors, because as weird as it would be for the Warriors to acquire Dennis Schroder on the 15th of December and then trade him less than 2 months later, the ability to be able to do that is actually really important. Because again, I spoke about yesterday, would the Warriors really want to make a move for Schroder, given it was clearly the most obvious move the Warriors could make, right? Clearly. But would they want to do that and inhibit their ability to go and make a bigger move? And I was questioning that. But this actually doesn't do that, because they can just include Schroder in a deal for someone else. So I think that's probably a fine detail to me that is hugely important. Because again, if you want to go out and trade for a star player like a LeBron, like a Jimmy Butler, who have been linked to the Warriors, then it's really hard, obviously, to aggregate salaries to get to that number. So being able to do that with Schroder, again, as weird as it would be to trade him less than 2 months after you acquired him, I think the ability to do that is actually really important. So to be able to have that to also be able to have Schroder's bird rights here. So they inherit his bird rights, which means they can exceed the cap, come for agency to sign him to whatever number they want. Obviously, the tax implications will come from that. It's going to be super fascinating to see what the Warriors intend to do next season. I think it will really probably be based on what they do this season, to be fair, and there's so much to play out, and how much success they have will ultimately dictate how much Joe Lacob and ownership is willing to pay on the roster for next season. But you had to look at De'Anthony Melton, and they did not have his full bird rights. So they were going to be limited to paying him 20% more, a maximum of 20% more than what he was on this season, which was 12.8 plus 20%, around like $15 million, let's say. So yes, obviously he's injured now, had a season-ending injury, so he won't be making $15 million anyway. But if De'Anthony Melton had a really good season, they wouldn't have been able to re-sign him because he would have likely got a bigger offer from somewhere else in free agency. With Schroder, the Warriors don't have that issue. Like if Schroder comes out, balls out, looks like a guy that should be making $20+ million, then the Warriors can actually pay Schroder that money. Now, will they? Is another question. It probably depends on, again, how much they're willing to pay on the roster, what's going to happen with Kuminga. Like everything around this kind of always centers on Kuminga because his restricted free agency is obviously such an important factor here for the Warriors, and whether or not you're going to have a guy going from making $7.6 million to all of a sudden jumping to $30 million, or whether that guy's not going to be on the roster anymore and you've actually still got that flexibility there that won't be the case if you do sign Kuminga to $30+ million. So we're going to wait and see there. But inheriting the bird rights of Dennis Schroder does give you some protection to say, hey, if we really want to re-sign this guy, we have the ability to be able to do that, and we have the ability to be able to go match another team's offer. Now, he's not a restricted free agent, he's still unrestricted, so he can leave and go elsewhere, which he may choose to do. It might result that he doesn't like the Warriors, he doesn't necessarily like either playing alongside or as a backup to Steph Curry, and he finds a better opportunity elsewhere. So he will still be an unrestricted free agent. He can choose his own path. But in terms of what the Warriors can actually offer him, they're not limited because they will inherit his bird rights. So I think that's really important here. A couple other things in terms of the reporting on this. So Anthony Slater of The Athletic has reported that the sides also discussed Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith in larger structures of a possible trade, but the Warriors preferred to maintain their young talent and keep this initial trade a simple swap that filled the need. So basically what it's telling me is clearly the Warriors didn't want to give up primarily Kuminga. There's been some talk floating about that any trade involving Cam Johnson, the Nets wanted Jonathan Kuminga in return. Now, clearly the Warriors just didn't want to do that, and I can understand Brooklyn's point of view of wanting Kuminga for Cam Johnson and not really falling for anything less than that. And I can also see the Warriors side of seeing, hey, we've got a guy here who we think is a more talented player than Cam Johnson. Now, you can make an argument for both sides. If you're a Warrior fan, you think the Warriors should have traded Jonathan Kuminga for Cam Johnson, I can absolutely see why you would argue for that, because I think Cam Johnson is a shooter. It kind of feels a better role, a better need for the Warriors than necessarily what Kuminga does. But then I can also see why the Warriors wouldn't have given up Kuminga, because I think he's a better talent than Johnson. And yes, you could say, again, if you were arguing for the trade, you would say, well, Cam Johnson's a better fit right now for a team that's trying to contend with Steph Curry. But clearly the Warriors have an eye to the future. And I think Kuminga right now, is he that much of a worse player than Cam Johnson? I don't think he's that much worse than him right now. And he's got the potential of being so much better. So, I don't know. I think it's the right move to just keep this as a simplistic one-for-one trade where it's Melton and, okay, maybe it's Beekman as well, but that's clearly not a stumbling block in any of these trade talks in whether the Warriors acquire Schroder or not. Reece Beekman's not going to be a hurdle there in any way, shape or form. But for now, it can be that trade simplistically, an effective one for the Warriors, and then they're going to have the next 6 weeks or so to gather more data on who Jonathan Kuminga is, continue to give him this role where he's 25, 30 plus minutes, I don't even know why I said 25, 30 plus minutes a game, in a starting role to see whether he can be that guy. I think Schroder might actually impact him a little bit because you are bringing another genuine scorer into the mix who is a go-to guy offensively. You can put the ball in Dennis Schroder's hands and he can make plays for you. And honestly, I think most Warrior fans are probably going to be more comfortable with a veteran guard, 31-year-old Dennis Schroder, with the ball in his hands in big moments down the late stretch of games than they will be Jonathan Kuminga. Okay, so again, it's going to be that push and pull of balancing the Warriors trying to find out what they've got with Kuminga with trying to win games. And I think ultimately Dennis Schroder is going to help them do that. Okay, it gives them a very obvious closing lineup with Steph, Schroder, I'd say Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond. I think that's likely now. Most people would say that's too small. Okay, maybe there's a time where Kuminga's not in the closing lineup and it's Looney instead. I still think they've got a situation to figure out with their 5 spot. There's certainly going to be more speculation discussions around that and what the Warriors do next, because I'm adamant that this is not the only move the Warriors are going to make. This was the simple, effective, easy one. This is an easy trade for the Warriors to make. You got a guy who's out with a season-ending ACL injury, and all you got to do is give him up and 2 second-round picks for a guy averaging 18 points and 6.5 assists a game. That's an easy trade to make. It's a home run one. Like, it's a great deal to make, but it's also an easy one because it's so good. And the Nets were clearly incentivized to say, hey, maybe we could wait and try and get a first-round pick. But you know what? If we wait, Dennis is going to continue playing for us. He's going to continue helping us win games, and we don't want that. That's going to hurt our chances of tanking and trying to get a high pick. So the Nets were clearly incentivized by that. I think a lot of Brooklyn fans would I've seen some Brooklyn fans on social media a little bit disappointed at the fact they got so little in return. But then some others also realize that, hey, we want to tank. This franchise wants to tank. And so you can't be holding out wanting more for Dennis Schroder and say, okay, well, maybe we will get a first-round pick by February 6th on the last day before the deadline. But you know what? That's an extra nearly 2 months of having Dennis Schroder on the team. He's going to be winning games, putting up nearly 20 and 79. So they were clearly incentivized to do that. And as a result, the Warriors got a great deal here. So in terms of the Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith stuff, I still think there's a world in which, especially Johnson, like, he could still be a Warrior. Like, I think it's a case of, again, the Warriors getting another 6-week sample size here of Kuminga and what he can become. And then if they decide, hey, you know what, he's not really for us, paying him $150+ million, we're not really wanting to do that. So maybe they go back to Brooklyn and say, you know what, we're actually willing to do that trade now. We're willing to do a Kuminga, Gary Payton II, Looney. Maybe it's, should see what happens with the guard situation now because Schroeder comes into the mix, and I'll talk about that in a second. But maybe it's a 3-for-1 trade for Cam Johnson, and the Warriors are more willing to pay Cam Johnson. I think he's got $45 million left over the next 2 years rather than paying a whole big new $150 million contract to Kuminga. So just because they're not getting Cam Johnson in this deal, I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility of them getting him closer to the February 6th deadline. I think it's more of a case of right now the Warriors still wanting to wait and see what they've got with Kuminga and fully finding that out over a 10 to 15 game sample size before they pull the trigger on a more risky trade. Because this, again, is just not a risk for the Warriors. Like, what is the downside to Dennis Schroder? Like, the downside to me, the only downside I had was it impacted their ability to go make a bigger deal with Melton's expiring contract. Well, that's not the case anymore because Marks has said that they can actually go out and trade Schroder before the deadline. So there's literally no downside to this trade for the Warriors. Like, now, will Dennis Schroder work? I've seen some people question on social media saying, you know, he needs the ball in his hands to be effective, and the Warriors play such a unselfish, high ball movement, high player movement style, free-flowing offense that doesn't necessarily suit Dennis Schroder. And you know what? I agree with that to a degree. I do agree, like, Schroder needs the ball in his hands to be effective. However, what we've seen from the Warrior offense in the last 9 games and being ranked 28th in offense, and particularly late in fourth quarters, like, they've really struggled. They do just need a guy who you can put the ball in the hands of and say, go make a play. And that's what Schroder provides. So, yes, maybe the fit is questionable to a degree, but you've got a team that desperately needs more ball handling and playmaking, who just clearly offering the backup point guard minutes to Brandon Pajemski going into the season was a mistake. I spoke about it relentlessly during the offseason about, hey, this is a huge responsibility to put on a guy who's never done it before in his career and is entering his second season. Like, I actually think this might help Pods to a degree. Now, we can get onto him and who this will impact. I think he's maybe the main one, and I think most people view that negatively. Slater said in his article that Schroder coming in is likely to limit the minutes for Pods and Buddy Hield as well. Hield, I think you're still going to need his shooting out there. Like, Schroder has shot the ball very well on reasonable volume this season, but he's not known as an out-and-out shooter by any means. He's not a quick trigger guy. Like, he's not going to be running off screens, spotting up and stuff like that. So I still think Buddy Hield will play. Pods, yes, I think his minutes will be limited, but maybe he can actually have more impact by not having to worry about being the team's primary ball handler, primary decision maker in the second unit, primary playmaker in the second unit. I think he might actually, it feels like he could go back to more of a role of last season where he's playing next to Chris Paul or Steph or whatever else, and he's more of just a supplementary player where he can kind of do a little bit of everything but not have to be relied upon to do any one thing. And I actually think that could help. It could come back. Like, he's got to a point where last season he was doing a whole lot of everything and he was impacting the game in a variety of ways. And now this season he's kind of doing a whole lot of nothing. Like, he's still trying to do a bit of everything, but it's just not working whatsoever. I just think this actually might help him a little bit, even if his minutes get decreased a little bit. In terms of his overall impact and how he plays, it might actually improve. So we'll wait and see. Clearly, fans are going to be concerned about the potential of small ball lineups with adding another guard to the mix. And now you've got Steph, Schroder, Hield, Pods, GP2. Look, I have no issue with a Steph Schroder backcourt. I think Schroder is pretty underrated defensively. Like, he can be a primary perimeter defender for you and a pretty good one at that. So I have no issues with that backcourt. I think that's the backcourt that the Warriors will close games with. Question becomes whether Schroder will actually start games. I could see it. I could see them starting games, particularly with the kind of injury issues that Steph is dealing with at the moment. He's questionable again for tomorrow's game against Dallas with, I think it sounds like a neck issue. So with those injury issues, maybe in order to try and relieve him of some of the burden, some of the pressure offensively, maybe you say, yeah, we're just going to start Dennis Schroder straight away next to Steph and have Steph, Schroder, more so Schroder, Steph in more of an off-ball role, Wiggins, Kuminga, and then I still don't know what you're doing in terms of, are you starting Draymond? Are you going back to Looney? TJD's still there. Are you bringing in another center? Like, there's still that question mark at center that the Warriors need to address. But this is a guy that I think Schroder will average 25 plus minutes a game for the Warriors. He's not exactly like Melton. Like, I think Melton was probably still a better fit for the Warriors and a better fit next to Steph, just as more of a better three-point shooter, more of a spot-up shooter, 40% on threes, can offer some of that secondary ball handling and playmaking, but won't necessarily take the ball out of Steph's hands. I think Schroder will take the ball out of Steph's hands a bit, and maybe as fans, as we watch games, we might criticize that a bit and say, why is Dennis on the ball so much and Steph's off the ball? That's going to be a balance Steve's going to need to find, but again, I think with the injury issues and the fact that Steph's getting on with age a little bit, I think it's probably a good thing that the Warriors now have another guy that is a certified, we know he, at the very least, the Warriors probably have the best backup point guard in the NBA now, at the very least. At his best, he's like the best backup point guard in the league, and he can also play next to Steph, play 25, 30 minutes, give you 15 plus points, 6, 7 assists. Like, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it goes. And I don't see the downside to this. Like, it's 2 second-round picks, and it's an expiring contract. You've now got well, you've got the first 6 weeks or so to evaluate how it's going. And you know what? If it's not going that well, you can actually move him again at the deadline, which I didn't know you could do. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But I think it's objectively a good move for the Warriors. Like it's really good value. It's just, no one, I don't think anyone would argue that, hey, this puts the Warriors, it catapults them into championship contention. And that's ultimately what most fans want, is a seismic deal, a seismic trade that is going to push the Warriors over the top and into the very top echelon of teams in the NBA. Can they do that now over the coming weeks and nearly 2 months? We will wait and see. But this trade is a very simple and effective one that still allows them the flexibility and the versatility to go and do whatever they want. They still have all their young guys. They still have all their future first-round picks. They still have basically all their salary, because they still can trade Schroder again at the deadline if they wish. So it's a good move. Like, it is a good move. In fact, I'd say it's a great move. It's a great move without pushing the Warriors over the top into championship contention like most fans would like. So looking forward to seeing it. If it goes through as planned in the next 24 hours, then you'd imagine Schroder will probably play his first game for the Warriors on Thursday against the Memphis Grizzlies. So looking forward to that one. I'm excited. Like, anytime a new player comes to a team, you've got to be optimistic on what they can provide for you. And I think as a fan, like, I would be doing a disservice to myself as a fan if I wasn't looking at this with a half glass full approach of, okay, these are all the reasons it's going to work. Now, I would be doing myself a disservice as well as a person that analyzes the game without trying to point out perhaps some of the questionable stuff. And I do think there is a bit of a questionable fit there with, Schroder needing the ball in his hands to be effective in order to be effective in a Warrior system that prioritizes so much free-flowing motion offense. Like, I get it. I get some concerns there. I get people, saying, "Oh, this is just going to lead to more small ball lineups, 3-guard combination, stuff like that." Okay, there's some concerns there. This is not all positive necessarily, but again, the downside to it, I think, is very minimal. So we'll wait and see, but I'm excited for it. I'll finish it up there. There's going to be plenty more to talk about. The Warriors have a few days off after tomorrow's game against the Mavericks, so there's going to be plenty more to talk about. I'm sure there's going to be more trade discussion, more reporting as a result of this impending deal over the coming 48, 72 hours. So I'll have it all covered here for you. And if I don't have it covered here straight away, it'll certainly be on bluemanhoop.com, where you can check out my work as well. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. You can follow us, Golden State with Mates, on Instagram and TikTok as well. I'll be back for a post-game live after the game against the Mavericks tomorrow. Let's hope the Warriors can get back on the winners list.